You don't need a flight number, Paige, because you aren't going. My father's voice cut through the applause at his anniversary dinner, loud enough for all 30 guests to hear. He pointed his champagne glass at me and laughed. Someone has to stay behind to feed the dogs and watch your sister's kids. That's your job. He didn't say it like a request. He said it like he was speaking to a servant. My mother smoothed her napkin and looked away. My sister Brittany just smirked. In that moment, 30 people watched my own family decide I wasn't worth a seat on the plane. But as I stood there humiliated, my hand brushed against my phone. They thought they were putting me in my place. They didn't know they had just left me alone with their financial records. Before I tell you what I found in my father's safe that night, and how I used it to turn their paradise into a federal prison, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to see how far this story travels. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. 30 people were holding their breath, waiting for the explosion. They expected tears. They expected me to flip the table or scream at my father for treating a 32-year-old woman like an indentured servant. My mother was actually gripping the tablecloth, her knuckles white, bracing for the scene that would ruin her perfect evening. And honestly, a part of me wanted to give it to them. I wanted to shatter every crystal glass in the room. But I didn't. I just stood there completely still. My sister Brittany broke the silence. She walked over to me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and thrust a 3-inch thick binder into my chest. Here, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. It's the itinerary for the dogs and the kids. The twins need their humidifier set to exactly 68 degrees, and the dogs only eat the organic lamb mix, warmed up for 15 seconds. Don't mess it up. I looked at the binder. I looked at my father, who was watching me with a smug, expectant grin. He wanted me to fight. He wanted me to beg. Because if I fought, he could call me dramatic. If I begged, he could call me weak. He wanted the satisfaction of denying me. So I did the one thing none of them expected. I smiled. Okay, I said, taking the binder. I understand. Have a wonderful trip. The relief in the room was palpable. My father's chest puffed out. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, heavy and condescending. That's a good girl, Paige. I knew you'd see reason. We all have to make sacrifices for the family. He thought I had submitted. He thought he had won. But he didn't understand what I was doing. There is a concept in behavioral psychology called strategic compliance. It is what you do when you are trapped in a cage with a predator that is bigger and stronger than you. You don't bare your teeth. You don't attack. You lower your head. You expose your neck. You make yourself look small and harmless. You let them think they have total control because arrogance makes people sloppy. Arrogance makes them leave the cage door unlocked. If I had screamed at my father, he would have kicked me out of the house right then. He would have taken back the keys. He would have hired a security guard to watch the property while they were gone. But by accepting that binder, by accepting the humiliation, I bought myself access. I wasn't agreeing to be his babysitter. I was agreeing to be left alone inside his empire for 7 days without supervision. I held that binder like it was a holy text. I listened as my mother listed off more chores, watering the orchids, collecting the mail, waiting for the pool cleaner. I nodded at every demand. I thanked them for trusting me. And the whole time my heart wasn't racing with fear. It was steady with a cold, electric anticipation. They were leaving me in the house where my father kept his private servers. They were leaving me with the physical files they thought I was too stupid to understand. When the dinner finally ended and the guests filtered out, whispering about how graceful I was about the whole thing, my father gave me one last look. Don't let me down, Paige, he said. I looked him right in the eye. I won't, Dad. I promise I'll do exactly what needs to be done. He didn't see the double meaning. He didn't see the wolf behind the smile. He just saw his free help falling in line. He went to bed thinking he was the king of the world. He had no idea that he had just handed the executioner the axe. Most people in Greenwich looked at me and saw a failure. They saw a 32-year-old woman living in her parents' guest cottage, driving a 10-year-old sedan, and seemingly doing nothing with her life. My mother told her friends I was finding myself. My sister Brittany told her friends I was basically the help. But the truth was buried in an encrypted server in the basement. I wasn't just the family babysitter. For the last 5 years, I have been the shadow CFO of my father's construction empire. My father, Richard, is a man who believes laws are suggestions for poor people. He built his wealth on cut corners, under-the-table labor, and shell companies designed to hide assets from the IRS. But he is terrible at math. 5 years ago the walls started closing in. He didn't hire a high-powered firm to fix it because firms ask questions. Firms have ethics policies. Instead he came to me. He sat me down, poured me a glass of cheap wine, and told me that if I didn't help him organize the books, the family would lose everything. He told me it was my duty. So I became the fixer. While Brittany was posting unboxing videos of designer bags I knew were bought with laundered money, I was up until 4 a.m, creating paper trails to cover their tracks. I managed the offshore accounts. I cleaned up the financial disasters created by Tyler, Brittany's husband, whose tech startups were just sinkholes for tax-free cash. I lived in a state of constant low-grade terror. My father made me sign documents as the responsible party. He made sure that if the house of cards fell, it would land on me. I did it because I thought I was saving us. I thought I was earning my place at the table. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I saved them enough times, they would finally respect me. Then came the night that killed the daughter and woke up the auditor. It was 3 years ago. I was in my father's office, shredding documents he didn't want the state inspectors to see, when his email notification pinged. It was a thread between him and Tyler. The subject line was simply, "The Page Problem." I clicked it. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read my father's words. "Don't worry about Paige asking for a salary. She's too scared to leave and too ugly to get married. She's cheaper than a firm and she's our free insurance policy. If the feds ever come knocking, we claim she went rogue. She's the perfect patsy." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there in the glow of the monitor, feeling a cold, metallic clarity wash over me. They didn't love me. They didn't even like me. I was just a human shield they were fattening up for the slaughter. That was the night the audit began. I didn't quit. I didn't confront them. I went back to work. But I stopped fixing their mistakes. I started documenting them. For 3 years I have been copying every ledger, every incriminating email, every bank transfer. I built a digital archive of their crimes. I smiled at family dinners. I babysat their children. I let them treat me like a doormat because a doormat is the one thing in the house that sees everyone's dirty shoes. They thought I was dependent on them. They didn't realize that I was the only thing standing between them and a federal indictment. And tonight, with the house empty and the flight to paradise departing, I wasn't just going to stand aside. I was going to open the door and let the consequences in. The morning of the departure was a masterclass in chaos. While the sun was still struggling to rise over the manicured lawns of Greenwich, my sister Brittany was screaming about a vintage Hermes scarf. She was tearing apart the guest room, throwing silk and cashmere onto the floor like a tornado in a boutique. Tyler, her husband, was sitting on the edge of the bed wearing sunglasses inside, nursing a hangover that smelled like top-shelf bourbon and bad decisions. "Paige!" Brittany shrieked. "Where is it? I cannot go to Hawaii without the blue one. It matches my bikini." I walked into the room, reached under the pile of discarded clothes she was standing next to, and pulled out the scarf. I handed it to her without a word. She didn't say thank you. She just snatched it and shoved it into her Louis Vuitton carry-on. "Finally," she huffed. "Try to be more organized next time." I went downstairs. The foyer was piled high with luggage. Enough for a year, not a week. My mother was shouting instructions at the private driver about how to handle her hat box. The air smelled of expensive perfume and stress. "Paige, into the study. Now." My father's voice came from the hallway. I followed him into his sanctuary, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind us to drown out the noise of the family. He walked behind his massive desk, opened the top drawer and pulled out a stack of envelopes. They weren't love letters. They were IRS notices. Thick, heavy, and unopened. He tossed them onto the mahogany surface. They slid across and stopped right in front of me. "These came last week," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "They're flagging some discrepancies in the payroll accounts for Tyler's startup. I need you to make them go away while we're gone." I looked at the envelopes. I knew exactly what was in them. I knew because I had warned him 6 months ago that moving cash between the shell companies would trigger a flag. He hadn't listened then. Now he wanted a miracle. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "These look serious. If they're auditing the payroll." "Fix it, Paige," he snapped, his eyes cold. "And remember whose signature is on those returns as the preparer. It's yours. If this ship goes down, you're the captain. I'm just the investor. So I suggest you spend this week being very creative with those ledgers, or you're going to look very bad in an orange jumpsuit." It was a threat. Plain and simple. He was reminding me that he had set me up. He had made me the fall guy years ago, ensuring that if the feds ever came, his hands would be clean and mine would be in cuffs. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key. The key to the filing cabinet. The one place in the house I was usually forbidden to touch without supervision. "Here," he said. "All the hard copies are in there. Sort it out." He walked past me out of the room. I picked up the key. It felt heavy like a weapon. By 8 o'clock the limo was loaded. My mother was checking her makeup in the compact mirror. Brittany was already posting a selfie captioned, "Paradise Bound." "Oh, one last thing," my father said, turning back from the open limo door. He held out his hand. "Give me your house key." I froze. "Pie key. You're staying here all week," he said with a dismissive wave. "You don't need to come and go. And frankly, with all the stress you've been under, I don't want you losing it. We can't have security risks while we're away. It was a power move. He wanted to lock me in. He wanted to make sure I knew that even when he was 3,000 miles away, he controlled my access to the world. I reached into my pocket and handed him my key. "Good girl," he said. He got into the limo. The door slammed shut with a heavy, final thud. I stood on the driveway and watched the long black car snake down the driveway and disappear through the iron gates. They were laughing. They were drinking champagne. They were heading to paradise, confident that they had left their servant behind to scrub their messes clean. They thought they had trapped me. They didn't realize they had just locked themselves out. I turned around and looked at the empty house. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was a crime scene, and for the first time in 5 years, the detective had the run of the place. I walked inside and locked the door. Then I headed straight for the study. The moment the taillights of the limousine vanished around the bend, the daughter died. The auditor was born. I didn't wave goodbye. I didn't go upstairs to unpack. I turned the lock on the front door, walked straight into my father's study, and inserted the brass key into the filing cabinet. It turned with a satisfying click. My father thought he was leaving me with a punishment. He thought I would spend the next week sweating over payroll discrepancies, trying to save his skin. He forgot the first rule of accounting. The person who cleans the mess knows exactly where the dirt is buried. I sat down at his computer. I didn't need to guess his password. It was Richard 1, because arrogance is always predictable. I bypassed the decoy files he kept for the state auditors and went straight to the hidden partition. I found it in seconds. The shadow ledger. It was a masterpiece of fraud. 5 years of double booking, ghost employees, and construction materials expensed to projects that didn't exist. And there, right at the top of the recent expenses, was the folder labeled Board Retreat Hawaii. I clicked it open. He had expensed the entire vacation. The first-class flights, the villas, the private chefs as a mandatory business seminar. He was using corporate funds to pay for Brittany's tan. It was tax fraud, plain and simple, and it was the final nail in his coffin. I didn't just read it. Took it all. I plugged in my own encrypted black hard drive. I initiated a mirror copy of the entire system. Every email, every forged invoice, every offshore transfer. The progress bar crawled across the screen, green and steady. While it downloaded, I worked on the physical evidence. I emptied the filing cabinet of the original deeds and the page problem printouts. I packed them into a waterproof banker's bag. When the download timed complete, I pulled the drive. I wiped the keyboard with a microfiber cloth. I wiped the desk surface. I wiped the door handle. I wasn't just leaving, I was erasing myself. I wanted him to come back to a house that felt like a tomb. I walked into the kitchen. The binder of chores, the dog food schedule, the kids' humidifier instructions, sat on the marble island where Brittany had left it. It looked ridiculous now, an artifact from a life I no longer lived. I took the brass key to the filing cabinet and set it on top of the binder. Then I pulled a yellow sticky note from my pocket and stuck it to the leather cover. I wrote 4 words. Consider this my resignation. I grabbed my bag, not the duffel of clothes my mother expected, but a secure case containing 5 years of felonies. I walked out the front door and left it unlocked. Let the security alarm chirp. It wasn't my house to protect anymore. I drove my sedan to JFK, but I didn't head to the economy lot. I pulled up to the curb, handed the keys to a valet and walked into the terminal. I wasn't flying to Hawaii to beg for scraps. I walked up to the first-class counter for the direct flight to San Francisco. The agent looked at my ticket. Heading out for business or pleasure, Ms. Dixon? I looked at the black bag on my shoulder. It contained enough evidence to put 3 people in federal prison for a decade. Business, I said. Strictly business. 2 days later, I was standing in a room that smelled of expensive perfume and old money. My Aunt Teresa's design studio in San Francisco wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary of high art and higher tax brackets. She was hosting a private pop-up show to introduce me to her inner circle, not as her niece, but as a financial consultant for the elite. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wearing an apron or a polyester blend. I was wearing a silk structural gown Teresa had designed, holding a glass of vintage champagne and actually breathing. "You look like you belong here," Teresa whispered, squeezing my arm. "No one would ever guess you spent the last decade filing receipts for a construction company." I smiled, feeling the phantom weight of the binder finally lifting off my chest. I felt safe. I felt untouchable. Then the double doors at the front of the gallery burst open with a violence that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. The music stopped. The chatter died. Every head in the room turned. Standing in the doorway were my father and Tyler. They looked like a car crash in a museum. They were still wearing their vacation clothes. Linen shirts stained with sweat, faces peeling with angry red sunburns. But they weren't alone. Flanking them were two massive men in dark tactical gear, the kind of private security you hire when you want to hurt someone without leaving a police report. My father burst into the gallery with guards blocking the exits, screaming for them to grab me. In front of horrified guests, he accused me of stealing $50,000 in diamonds and hard drives, painting me as a criminal to hide his own crimes. Tyler threatened to call the police unless I handed over the bag. Instead, I pulled out a manila envelope. I told them I wasn't a thief. I was a whistleblower. The drives were already with the IRS and FBI, and touching me meant tampering with a federal witness. The guards backed off immediately. My father paled as I listed his crimes: offshore accounts, fake payroll, shell companies, and even the Hawaii trip he thought was a vacation. The room turned on him. Guests started calling their lawyers. Aunt Teresa ordered him out, and as he staggered outside, federal agents arrived and arrested him and Tyler. The investigation seized the houses, cars, and hidden funds. My parents and sister were left broke. Richard and Tyler got 5 years for tax evasion and fraud. I received $3.6 million under the whistleblower program and bought Aunt Teresa's building. I realized my father was never powerful, only loud, leveraged, and funded by stolen money. When it vanished, so did he. Now I own my life, my work, and my future. Family isn't blood. It's the people who honor your worth.